Hey everybody. I know that I told everybody I was going to do this on Facebook, so I wanted to take the time to do this. I think it's going to be a video series just about explaining anxiety and depression and trauma, grief, PTSD, things like that. Now, here's a disclaimer: I'm not a doctor. I cannot and will not diagnose you. I do not suggest that if anything I say in these videos I don't suggest you follow that. I suggest you talk to your doctor, and I suggest you come up with a good plan with your doctor to treat your symptoms, okay? I am under a doctor's care, so I do prescribe to that line of thought as well. And I wrote down a few things that I think are important to kind of discuss first. And the first thing is, well, what causes anxiety? What's anxiety, right? Anxiety is an irrational fear of something. So, and there's all different kinds. There's general anxiety disorder, there's social anxiety, there's relationship anxiety, there's just all different kinds. And not everybody is the same. And even if you're diagnosed with the same kind of anxiety, it's not going to be the same. So just know that anxiety is very individualistic. It is very much catered to you. So when we talk about anxiety, people think, oh, everybody has anxiety, and that's true. Everybody does have anxiety. And I want you to recognize the difference between normal anxiety and abnormal anxiety. But first, a little backstory on me to understand a little bit of how I kind of grew up and how my life was because of anxiety. Now, I don't remember ever in my life not having anxiety. I always had it. I can remember being very, very small and having very irrational fears about a lot of things. But back then, of course, I didn't know what it was. And my parents were also both suffering from anxiety disorders that were undiagnosed, but now in hindsight you can see. And I don't think that for me anything in my life caused my anxiety. I believe that anxiety is very hereditary, and I believe that I think it's just there. Now, I think you can trigger it, and I think events in your life can trigger it, but I think you always have anxiety. And you can disagree with me, and that's fine. This is, again, my journey and my experience. So I guess if we start at the beginning, I grew up pretty poor. We grew up not always having food, not always 100% sure where we were going to live. We lived on the system, food stamps and public housing, and things like that. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that both of my parents had anxiety. And it's really hard to function with anxiety when you don't know what it is. And my parents did self-medicate. My father drank. And did other things. But my mom didn't. In my early childhood, my mom did not drink or do anything. She used to guilt trip me a lot, though. Like, she would say things like, oh, I'm gonna die, and you're gonna miss me, and that's true. And so it would really upset me, and she would get some, and I don't think she did it to be cruel or mean. it was just the way that she needed me to react to show that I loved her. So that's just what it was and how I grew up. I was constantly afraid that my mom was going to die. And my mom instilled a lot of fear in me, irrationally. So, like, I grew up not being allowed to go anywhere by myself because somebody would rape me or kidnap me or kill me. And I was terrified to go outside. And that lasted for a big part of my life. I think I was 15 or 16 by the time I actually got up and did something by myself, walked down the street, went to the store. Every stranger that I met was a potential predator. So I did not want to meet any strangers. So I didn't. And anytime I was forced to, I had a panic attack. I panicked. I could not do it. I couldn't get out the door. I couldn't get down the street. You name it. I just couldn't do it. So that was kind of like my mom's way, I think, of coping, is to make sure that I was safe by making sure that I was terrified so that I would never do anything bad. When I was 6 and 7, we lived above a church. I don't think it was a real church. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. It was basically a house of horrors is what it was. But we rented an apartment upstairs, and my dad knew the priest. I'm using that term very lightly right now. And they would work together. And this was not like a normal Catholic church. This priest had been married, excuse my dog, sorry, and divorced 4 times. But he did mass every Sunday. And as a little kid, I would go to the mass because, I mean, I thought it was interesting and I didn't have anything else to do, and he encouraged it, so I would do that. Well, this priest molested me. And, you know, it seems like so typical, like, oh, a priest molested somebody, but this was before it was cool, so. And he did all of the typical things. Don't tell your parents. I'll hurt them. I'll hurt you. You can't. It's our little secret. Everything. I'm not going to go into detail, but it was very, very traumatizing. And I don't care what anybody says. When you're molested, it changes you. And so, anyway, eventually, I did tell my parents, because he had molested a friend of mine as well, and we both kind of told. And my dad was an alcoholic, and he was very drunk, and he went down and beat the crap out of the guy, and that was it. Nobody called the police. Nobody filed a report. Nobody did anything. And I continued to live there. Now, after the, year and a half, he didn't do any, after everything had came out, he didn't attempt to touch me or hurt me again. But he did hurt other kids. And I have carried guilt about that because nobody called the police. This guy was molesting kids. He was a predator. He was an apex predator. And not one person ever reported this guy. He was never on a sexual offenders list. He was never arrested. So essentially, he got away with hurting a lot of kids his whole life. After that happened, my mom just told me, just forget about it. Just pretend it didn't happen. And when you're little like that, you can. I think you can compartmentalize that. But when I turned 12, and I don't know why, but when I turned 12, it all came flooding back to me, and I don't know if I was having dreams about it. We had been kicked out of some place, and we were living with some family, and maybe that was a trigger. I don't know, but all I know is I had forgotten about it for many years, and now it was back, and I felt I felt ashamed and guilty, just like it was the very first time. I was shaking. I didn't sleep or eat for days. I always had cold sweats. I hyperventilated. For days, I walked around obsessing about, thinking about what I could have done to change it, what I could have done to fix it. And I don't know if anybody has obsessive thoughts. I do. I do have OCD, pure O, which most of my obsessions and compulsions are in my head. So I don't wash my hands or check doors, or not obsessively anyway. But in my mind, I go over things over and over and over and over and over again, 1,000 million times a minute, to try and make myself feel better by imagining a better outcome or trying to get out of the situation. And you can't, because it's in the past. There's nothing you can do to change it. But that doesn't stop your mind from ruminating on that. So day and night, day and night, day and night, I thought about it. I cried about it. I was in a constant state of panic. And when I talked to my mom about it, she told me to forget about it. And I yelled at her that I can't forget about it. You can't forget about it, Mom. But she didn't want to talk about it. I'm sure she felt guilty that it happened to me. So we didn't talk about it. That is the first traumatic thing in my life I feel like happened. Where I really recognized that something was wrong. My thought processes were wrong. Because, I couldn't really recognize anxiety because everybody around me had it. So everybody acted the same. Crazy, stupid, arguing, trains of thought that were nonsensical, just chaos. And so we all lived in this chaos in our brain, and I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what it was. And then, when I turned 13, let me back up just a minute. My parents got divorced when I was 10. My mom got together with my stepdad almost immediately after, when we moved in with him. Now, at this point, my mom did start drinking. She was not an alcoholic yet, but she was definitely on her way. And my stepdad, he liked to drink. I don't know, I don't remember if he was an alcoholic at this point. He might have been, I don't know, because I just was so upset that my parents got divorced, and I was really, really angry. So, I did a lot of horrible things. To my mom and my stepdad. And I'm not proud of those things, and it hurts to think that I hurt them. But that's kind of what it is. So, my stepfather was not a kind man. He could be. He had his moments where he was good, and he had his moments where he was not good. But he was a Vietnam vet. He was in a coma for 18 months. He lost part of his hand in Vietnam, being blown up by a landmine. So he had severe PTSD, which was not treated. So his drinking was self-medicating, because I know, now looking back as a child, I didn't understand, but now I know that he was reliving things and had guilt and anxiety about things too, about what happened over there, and being in a coma for that long. It does. I mean, he had to have some brain damage, and I didn't understand that at the time, but I do now. But he was very bipolar. He was nice and then mean, and then nice and then mean. But the thing was with my stepdad is we butted heads a lot. I was very headstrong and angry. And at this point, I guess I was 11, we were constantly fighting. And my brother and sister, his children, with his ex, who was a very sweet lady, ended up having to live with us because their mom was ill, and she did pass away very young. And I know for my brother and sister that was so hard for them, and then to come into an environment where their dad was mean and abusive was hard. But a lot of stuff that happened to me happened while they were gone. So they did live with us, but they still saw their mom before she passed. She was still, she just couldn't have them physically, but she took them every weekend, and they saw her, and she, she was still there. So they would leave and go to their moms, and then my stepdad and I would fight and argue, and he would fight and argue with my mom. And so over the years, I became very angry and very, very hard. And I hated everybody. And I wouldn't let anybody in. I would rather just say, fuck you, than anything else. And I did that for a long time. So in high school, I fought in high school, constantly getting in trouble. Just being an asshole. I just was. I mean, I was bullied in school too. And so I was a bully. I was bullied, and then I became a bully. Because I just wasn't going to let anybody push me around. So I just always was there first, and that's wrong. But that's who I was. So high school was hard. Well, junior high, I guess. Again, I was in a situation where my parents were divorced. My dad was unstable. My mom was drunk. My stepdad was drunk. They would fight, and we would get kicked out, and we'd have to move in with family, and then he'd take us back again. And anyway, this is just backstory. I mean, you don't have to hear my whole story, but just to let you see kind of the progression of how I learned about my anxiety. So at this point, I had no idea what anxiety was. I was fighting every day. I had 44 in-school suspensions in one semester. I chased a girl down the hallway. I ripped open her classroom door, and I screamed that I was going to get her after school in front of her whole class, her teacher. I was out of control. I would step up and try and fight adults that I didn't like. I was out of control. And a lot of this had to do with my anxiety and the fact that I couldn't be hurt anymore. I couldn't go through it anymore. Nobody in my life listened to me. So I was constantly screaming, and nobody was listening. So a lot of things happened that got me to a point of I had to get out of my situation, because I had an incident where I could have killed someone. And I'm not going to go into the details, but it was so close. It would have been self-defense, but it was so close that it scared the crap out of me. because I could have killed them. I told them to do something, and if they hadn't have done it, I probably would have at least stabbed them in the throat. And that's hard to say because I'm not that kind of person, but I guess I was then. So anyway, I ended up coming to Arizona, and I was just as bad, but this environment was different. I had family here who lived normal lives, who had jobs and bank accounts and houses and cars, and they drove and they had their driver's licenses, and I had never had that before. I didn't know what it was like to be a responsible person. And when I first came out here, I'll admit I was a bitch. I was just a bitch, and it's fine because that's who I was. But the more I came to realize and see people living normal lives, I came to realize how abnormal my life was. And I didn't want to be the person I was in my heart, but I had to be because I was hurt, and I was so hurt and angry that I didn't want anybody in. I didn't want to let anybody in. I wanted to beat the crap out of everybody. I just always wanted to punch something. But nobody here engaged that behavior. So when I would get angry, people would not engage me. I would say something hurtful and they would not reply. And I was not used to that. I was always used to fighting. So if I said something, somebody said something back, and there we went. And I slowly realized that, there's something wrong with my train of thought. There's something wrong with me. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I saw my cousins and my friends going out and doing things, and I was terrified to leave the house. And I would have all these fears that just didn't make sense. And sometimes you can't even quantify the fear. Like, I wasn't afraid of anything specific sometimes. Sometimes I was just afraid. My stomach was in knots. I would get sick. And that's the irrational part of anxiety, is your fear is not rational. And when you have anxiety, people don't always understand that it is an illness because they can't see it. And a lot of people with anxiety, depression, they hide it well because they've been doing it their whole lives. And I hid my fear I hid my fear, my anxiety under anger. And I can still do that. I can still be pretty mean. I was a horrible kid. I put my mom through hell. I put my stepdad through hell. I put my dad through hell. I said a lot of mean things to my mom. I said a lot of mean things. And I hurt her more than I think any person in the world could hurt her. Because I was lost and I was angry. And I hated her. But I didn't really. I didn't really hate her. She was the person who I blamed. I was always a daddy's girl, so my dad did nothing wrong with my mom. It was her fault always. So, and that relationship with my mom, I never got back. When I was small, my mom was everything. My dad was always drinking and in jail, and my mom was always there, and I know she loved me. It has nothing to do with love, but when she met my stepdad, she put me second. And she wanted to live her life, and I get it now. But I was mean. So, I mean, God, anybody that can be that cruel to their mom, they could be cruel to anybody, because no holds barred after your mom. And we would get into fights, push, shove, hit. I was always bigger than her. There was a lot of things, but in my mind, again, anxiety and OCD at this point had taken control of my life, and that's what it was. That was my thought process. I couldn't get out of my head. And something would happen, I would obsess about it until I had to punch something, and I used to punch trees until my knuckles bled. And I used to do things that I'm not proud of, just to get out my emotion. But here in Arizona, it was different. I got to see what real life was like, and I wanted a piece of that. I wanted to live that way. But I didn't think I deserved it. I didn't think I could do it. And my mom was here, and then she left. And I lived with my aunt. And my aunt kind of set me on a pretty straight path. She didn't take any crap. She told me how it was going to be, and that I could, her way or the highway, basically. And it was hard. But I did learn. I eventually learned how to get out of the house without being terrified all the time. But my anxiety was always there. It never goes away completely. You can treat it. You can fight it. But it's always there. For me, my anxiety, let me just explain a little bit about my irrational fears, so that you can understand the suffering that I went through. So I've had a few events in my life that have traumatized me, but only for me. So when I was in 8th grade, I was in Catholic school, and this girl in my school had a boy hit her, just playing around, like, boop, and the vein in the side of her head popped, and she died of an aneurysm. And when I heard that, my brain held on to that. Don't let anybody hit you in the head, because you're going to have an aneurysm and die. Okay? So I obsessed about this for months. And when I say obsess, I mean I had constant headaches. I had always was taking Bayer aspirin or Bayer migraine. Now, I was a 12 when this happened, or whenever you are in 8th grade. What are you, 12? I think you're 12, well, 13 maybe. And I tortured myself. I had headaches all the time. I had to always go like this and make sure that I could feel my heart beat in my head, so that I knew my vein was still there and working. Because if you couldn't feel your heartbeat, in my mind, if you couldn't feel your heartbeat there, then your vein was popped. And it seems so stupid now, but it wasn't to me. It was terrifying. If somebody hit me anywhere in the head, I had a panic attack. I've passed out. I would immediately grab my vein, go run in a corner, and just keep my hands on my head and feel my heartbeat until I could calm down. Now, the headaches I was having, they weren't real. I'm positive of that now. They weren't real. I'm sure they were psychosomatic, but I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat because I was constantly worried about that, and that I went through that cycle for about 4 months. And then eventually they stop. Eventually they get less, and they get less, and you feel better, and they stop. But your brain finds something else. Your brain just, it is constantly looking and trying to find stuff to get its claws in. So that's also part of the OCD. That's the obsessive intrusive thoughts. Like, you can have thoughts, my dogs are being dumb. Like, you can have thoughts that are intrusive, and I would obsess that because I had this thought, I was a bad person. But the thought isn't the action, and you have to learn that. The thought, with people who don't have anxiety or OCD or things like that, they have these same thoughts, but their brain does not catch on to them. For people with anxiety, your brain, you have a thought and you have a reaction. Maybe you think, oh, why did I think that? Or what the hell? And normal people would just be like, what the hell was that? All right, whatever. But people with anxiety, you had a reaction to it, so your brain holds on to it because it makes it feel important. So the importance of the thought is not real, but your brain thinks it is. So now you have this thought that's horrible. Maybe you thought of running your car into a tree, or what happened if, you shot somebody. I mean, I don't know what the thought would be. What if you did drugs? I mean, it could be anything. It could be anything. But it causes a fear reaction in you. And so your brain holds on to it, and then you can't do anything but think about it. And you constantly ruminate on it to figure out a way to stop thinking about it. And it's a circle. It's a vicious circle because you can't. There's no way to think your way out of a thought. You just can't. You can't think your way out of a thought. And you can't stop yourself. You can't. And it gives you fear. You would have cold sweats. Why am I thinking this? Oh my God, I'm a horrible person. How the heck could a good person think about that? Or how could a person do that? Not do that, but why would I think about that? And so you're questioning a thought that probably everybody has had, but fleeting. Normal people don't even realize they're having the thoughts. Maybe they watched a movie and they thought, oh, I could shoot somebody, and then thought it went away. But I could be watching a movie and think, oh, I could shoot somebody, and what the fuck was that? And my brain, bah! And there it is. There it goes. And now I'm in a cycle. And the first weeks are hard because you cannot stop thinking about it. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how you try and distract yourself. It doesn't matter how much medication you take. The obsessive thought is there. And you have to learn coping techniques, behavioral health therapy, why can't I think of the name now that I'm on the spot? That's why. Cognitive behavioral therapy. There it is. And that's by a therapist that can show you ways to try to unhook the link between your brain and the thought. And it doesn't go away, and it doesn't happen overnight, but you can learn ways to put a halt to it, to make it less severe. And if anybody who has anxiety is watching, you know that less severe is better than nothing. So I'm going to leave it here for tonight. And that's just my backstory a little bit. And then in the next few days, I'll do a part 2, and we'll talk more about anxiety. We'll talk about depression. I'll talk about grief. And I'll also talk about some of the things that I do that help me. All right. Have a good night, guys. Have a good week, and I'll see you soon.